Since June of 14, we've released an episode every single Sunday. So that's technically 171 straight weeks we've released an episode.
That was Shawn Henninger, and this is Podcast Ninja.
Podcast Ninja.
What's going on, ninjas? I'm your host, Anthony, and this is Podcast Ninja, a show that interviews the most successful podcasters in the game. The goal is simply to uncover the best podcasting strategies that you can apply to your show. And this episode is with Shawn Henninger, who is the co-host of The Language of Bromance and Strange Indeed. Now, during the show, Shawn's going to share some experience as a co-host over the last 170 episodes over the last 3 years. And I really think that what Shawn and his co-host Richard are doing are basically kind of setting a good foundation of what I think a co-host relationship should be like. So you'll hear about how he prepares for the show, how they schedule interviews, how they split the workload, and then we're going to talk a little bit about his new podcast, Strange Indeed, at the end of the show. Let's get into the show. Where'd you meet Richard, man? Because you guys have been friends forever, right? How long you guys been friends?
So it was my senior year of high school, and I'd been working a grocery store job, and my boss had left there to work at a sports bar. So he was like, hey, why don't you come over here? We'll make you a server. And I got over there. I started serving. And there was a guy in the back who had really long hair who was kind of like, I was pretty shy and he was pretty loud. Not in like a bad way, but he just, had a presence about him. And so I don't know if I'd say intimidating, but I just didn't really, I didn't feel like it clicked. Because one, it was kind of the kitchen versus the servers. I don't know if you've ever worked in a restaurant, but there's totally that kind of divide between the front of the house and the back of the house. And I'm always kind of a guy that, I want to make friends with everybody. I don't really want to, I don't like when there's that kind of feeling of, it's us versus them when it's kind of a team effort. And so I'd worked there for about 6 or 7 months. Richard got promoted to the kitchen manager. And one day I was sitting in the front, and we were talking about horror movies, because at this time I was, huge into scary movies. And, this was, 2005 probably? So there was movies like Saw, there was the 13 Films to Die For, there's that festival going on, and all other kinds of horror movies were coming out at that time. And so I'm talking about all these horror movies with one of the other servers, and Richard comes up, he's like, hey, if you want to see a really, really messed up movie, go rent Wes Craven's very first movie, Last House on the Left. It is just completely messed up. And so I'm like, okay, I've seen scary movies, it can't be worse than Saw. So I get off, I go to a Blockbuster to show you how far back that goes. So I go to a Blockbuster, I walk, I find this movie, I pull it off the shelf, and I get it. And there's a girl I was kind of talking to at the time. So I was like, hey, you want to come back to my house and watch this movie with me? She's like, yeah, sure. So I get back to the house. My mom's there too. So, because I was, it was summertime or so. So I was not at school at the moment. So I was just back at home. And so I was like, hey, Mom, you want to watch this with us? It's just a scary movie. And I pop it in, and this movie, Richard basically kind of associates it as this is essentially Wes Craven's first movie. The dude that did Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, everybody knows Wes Craven now. And you watch this movie, and it is deeply, deeply disturbing. And I'm sitting here watching this with my mom and this girl that I'm kind of seeing. And there's a scene, and the whole time I'm like, I can't wait to get to work tomorrow because I want to ask Rich what the heck he made me watch. And so, it gets to a scene where, so basically, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Last House on the Left. They did a remake about 2 or 3 years ago, which was a little bit tamer. But there's a scene where, there's a girl who's getting tortured or something by a group of bad people, and the bad people end up going to her house, and her parents are there, and the parents figure it out, so they're trying to pick them off one by one. And so the mom takes one of the guys down by the pool, and, PG somewhat performs an act on him of some sexual nature, and as Rich says, gets a little bitey. So at that moment, I pause the movie, I pick up the phone, and I call the restaurant we were working at that time, and I'm like, hey, can you get Rich? And the person says, yeah, hold on. And Richard's in the back, this is during rush hour. he's flipping, burgers and steaks and making food and running the kitchen. And somebody runs back there's like, hey, Rich, you got a phone call. And, Richard's first thought, like, he was married at this time. He's like, oh, God, something's wrong with the wife. Maybe something's wrong with the kids. Because nobody calls people at work like that, at least not nowadays. Because especially now you have phones, so you kind of know what's going on. But so he rushes out there, he picks up the phone, and I don't even, like we were barely talking at this point. And I essentially just say, like, what the F did you make me watch? And at that moment, it clicked to who I was. He's like, oh, it's messed up, isn't it? I'm like, yes. And I'm like, he's like, what part you at? I'm like, the pool? He's like, yeah, it gets worse. I'm like, no, there's no way this can get worse. And I'm like, I'm sitting here with my mother and this girl that I'm hanging out with. He's like, why the hell would you watch that with those two? And at that moment, we were both like, I think there's a friendship here.
And that's it, man. It grew from there. So you guys started hanging out more, I'm assuming, watch more movies. Then you launched your show, right? You launched your podcast. What was that difference? How long did it take you guys to launch that podcast idea?
Oh, I mean, so while we worked at the restaurant, so this is 2004 or 2005. So from 5, 6, 7, and a little bit of 8, we worked together and we watched a lot of movies after work. And about 2007, I think, is when Kevin Smith came out with his podcast. And, we kind of bounced back and forth back then. Like, I think we could do something like this. And we kind of played ping pong with it. We're just like, yeah, let's do that. A month would go by and we'd be like, hey, what about that podcast thing we talked about? And it wasn't until I moved away, so I got a job about 2 hours away from where we're originally from. So the friendship was still there. We played a lot of D&D together, and we'd see each other about once a month. But it just like I kind of stopped going and playing, and he got busy. And we still talked on the phone, but it got less and less and less. And then one day when I went back home, we were sitting there playing D&D, and I actually had to leave early because my wife was sick. And he actually didn't get there till late. So like as I'm leaving, he's walking in. This is the first time we probably talked in, 4 to 6 weeks. And so we had like a 10-minute conversation. I'm like, yeah, sorry, I got to get going. And I'm driving home and I'm like, you know what? Like, this is like my best friend in the whole wide world. Like, this is a guy that's helped me get through a lot of bad stuff. And we talk literally like less than once a month. And so I get on my phone and I call him. Like, I'm maybe like 20 minutes outside of town heading back to where I live. And I'm like, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a podcast because we need to have more, like, we need to talk more. Like, we're best friends. Like, it's crazy that we don't talk to each other as much as we should. So I'm like, we're going to get mics. I'm going to research what's going to take, and we're going to record an episode on this day. And that night I got on the internet, looked around, got mics, got the gear, got like everything set up. And in that 4 weeks, we created our name, The Language of Bromance. And then the day we said we're going to record, we recorded that day. And we released, I think like 2 weeks or 3 weeks after that, we kind of built a little bit of a bank. And from there, we've released an episode every single week for, on September 24th, it will be 171 straight weeks we've released an episode.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. So wait, so back it up real quick. What's the show about for those that don't know?
So the Language of Bromance, originally when we started, it was just kind of, like I said, it was just the opportunity for us to once a week sit down and talk with each other. So like the first like 10 to 15 episodes were really kind of just trying to figure out what the show will be about. And we actually didn't figure out like what our thing was until probably about 2 years into it. We were at a conference for podcasting, the podcast movement, and we were telling people about our show and what it was and like some of our better episodes. Like we've had an episode where we kind of talk about there's this great emu war in Australia. And what happened is like these soldiers tried to fight off these emus that were eating a lot of the food that was there, a lot of the crops. And so like we made up this whole story about like, we're soldiers there and the emus are breaking into our homes and like trying to take over, like trying to like take our wives and like all this crazy stuff. And as we're explaining this to people, it's like, yeah, that's one episode. We've done one like this and this and this. Like, oh, so you're like you're an improv role-playing podcast. And Richard and I both look at each other and we're like, yeah, that's exactly what we are.
You got it perfectly right.
And so, I mean, and that's kind of what a lot of our shows are, is, we find a story or we find some kind of thing and we do our best to make each other laugh. Like the one thing that I love about our show is that that's genuine. Like it's not scripted. Like we don't sit there and be like, okay, well you say this and then I'll say this. This is a show legitimately for us. There'll be times where we'll listen to it. We'll Facebook each other or whatever. Be like, oh, here's the quote you said that was super funny. And the one thing that I absolutely love is that it comes out every Sunday. So usually I'll listen back to it to just make sure the audio sounds good, make sure there's no mistakes in there because I do all the editing and everything. And so once I get through it, like there'll be times where I'll sit there and I'll start laughing. And Richard does the same thing. He'll have his earbuds in. His wife will be next to him. He starts giggling, and our wives will ask us like, "Well, what are you listening to?" We'll be like, we're listening to my podcast." And they're like, "So you're laughing at yourself?" It's like, yeah, but this stuff's gold.
It's gold, man.
And yeah, it's just legitimate, like, laugh. Like, I love going back and editing too, because we're both I would say we're kind of glass half full people, so we're kind of pessimistic and we get down on ourselves a lot. And as we get through these shows, I'm always like, man, was that really good? Like, I mean, I know I laughed, but was it good at all? And it never fails going back through editing on those type of shows. It just there's always something that makes me laugh. And always kind of reminds me, it's like, this is kind of why we do the show, because we love to make each other laugh.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've listened to a few episodes, and that's the first thing I noticed was like your chemistry between you guys. You can't fake that, really. I don't think you can, unless there's tons of practice. But you could clearly see there's like it's light. It's light and airy. It's humorous, and I think it's pretty fun. So I mean, you said you don't even prepare, like you don't write like out jokes or anything like that. Like, I mean, maybe you write one joke or something. I'm just so surprised that there must be some sort of preparation or outline that you guys come up with now as opposed to when you first started, right?
Well, when we first started, it was a lot more like, hey, here's this. And so since we've kind of figured out, like, this is what we like to do, we'll go out, we'll find a story, we'll share it with each other and be like, hey, I think I want to do this. And usually whoever's presenting that story, the other one won't read it. Like, one of my favorite episodes we did was about these bonobos. They're these chimpanzees that the article, basically all it said is, there's these type of chimpanzees that once they find food as a group, they engage in a sexual orgy with each other. I see that headline and I send it to Rich and like, this is what we're doing it on. And I'll usually scan the article first just to make sure it's long enough and just to make sure that there's enough that we can kind of read off to, kind of banter back and forth on. But the other person won't read any of that at all. They just come in kind of pretty much just dry. Like, they just know the title of what's going on and kind of the basis of where we're going. And then from there, the other person will read it and we just kind of bounce it back and forth. Every now and then, like, I might shoot a joke towards him. Like, if he gives me a title, I'll say like, X, Y, and Z is kind of funny. Just like, we basically do our show over text. And sometimes those jokes will sneak in there, but it's not like written down or prepared. Like, we really try to make it more of an improv, off the cuff kind of feel.
Yeah, and like, before we started the show, we kind of did like a little bit of like a banter to break the ice, just chatting about stuff. I guess, do you guys do the same, or you get right into it right away and you record the whole thing?
Yeah, usually it's funny because when we first get on Skype, we do video chat on Skype. So we get to kind of see each other. And it never fails. Recently, it's been a little bit less because it's Richard just got another job, so he's kind of busier. So we're doing these later in the evenings. But typically, we would be like, okay, let's meet at 8. We get on, we talk from like 8 to 8:30. Then it'll be 9:30. Then it's like 10 o'clock. It's like, oh shit. Okay, well, how about we go ahead and start the show now, and then we kick it off? Because usually we're just talking about like maybe a movie we saw or how our day is going. And so I mean, there's typically times where we'll talk for an hour plus before we even kick the show off.
Man, I just thought of like 2 questions as you were doing. So, do you guys see each other often? Like, physically see each other often?
Not really. The previous 2 years, we went to Podcast Movement, so we kind of had like what we call a brocation, where him and I got in a car or a train and went to these conferences. But typically, we only see each other. Oh shoot, maybe like 2 or 3 times a year.
Okay.
That's not over Skype.
And then that's what the video is important, right? Because then that way it gives it more of like a personal kind of touch, I suppose, to it, right? And then just doing audio would be kind of...
We did audio for probably the first year and a half, maybe 2 years. And the only reason we did that is I think because we were concerned about our internet and stuff like that, like having the bandwidth to do it.
That's what I was thinking, exactly.
And and it was. I mean, it definitely was less personal. I mean, I still think we did a great job with it, but the challenges were like we didn't see each other for one, and then it made it really challenging for the conversations because if you're not looking at somebody, it's really hard to know like, oh, okay, they're about to say something, so I'm going to stop. So there's a lot of us talking over each other and having to fix that stuff in editing. But definitely seeing each other helps us feed off those cues, and also you get to see kind of the expression on their face, like it's like. Again, being pessimistic, whenever you hear one or the other laughing, like you don't see their facial laughs. So you're kind of like, oh, well, was that a fake laugh or was it not? Yeah. And all of our laughs are completely true. Like they're not fake whatsoever.
Well, even sometimes, like when you were telling me your backstory, I'm sitting here, I'm smiling on the microphone, but you can't tell that I'm actually like smiling as you're like sharing a story, even though I might not physically laugh. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I was gonna say, I guess it's important, man, because you could clearly hear that when you guys talk. I don't think the couple episodes I checked out, you guys don't talk over each other. It just seems, that's when I'm like, do you guys sketch it out? Because it seems too, it almost seems like so synchronized, and it's a perfect fit, man. I'm so impressed with it. So that's why I'm like, they must have like a code word or something like that. I don't know if you guys have any code words or anything, or maybe not on the show.
No, I mean that's definitely goes into the editing process. There's one of the things that you hear in some podcasts that are more, because we kind of get lumped into the two dudes in a basement podcast.
Yeah.
And I think what you see in a lot of those is there's a lot of dead air. There's a lot of talking over each other. And there's times where we'll do that. Like I'll be finishing a thought and Richard will jump in. And I've kind of learned, I think he's kind of learned, like, listen, either finish your thought and, the other person will still be talking, or, basically if you're the person getting talked over, just go ahead and continue your thought. And we always fix that in editing, because that's super easy to fix. Okay, so here's me talking. I'll let myself finish and I'll scoot the person's audio over just a little bit so it doesn't sound like we're talking over each other. And eliminating a lot of that dead space helps too, because there's times where, maybe we're just having a thought, or we're, there's just a pause in the conversation before we kick into the next part of the bit that, you leave it in there. And like me, whenever I'm listening to podcasts, if I hear that, I'm usually driving, so my instant thought is like, oh shit, my podcast, is buffering. And then I look at it, it's like, oh no, it's just quiet, like they're just dead air. And so I always try to make sure to kind of make that a little bit tighter, because, people are busy, so you want to give them the content when they can get it, not have them sit through, nothing.
Yeah, that's true. And you said you do most of you do the editing, you do the show notes, the sharing, the posts on the WordPress, you do all that?
Yeah, I take care of the WordPress site, so languageofbromance.com. I take care of that. I'm the one that usually kind of updates anything on there. The editing I go ahead and take care of. The uploading it to our host, sharing it on Facebook, Twitter. That pretty much kind of just relies on me to get that stuff up there.
So you, I guess,
Richard is.
Okay.
I was gonna say Richard's the talent, so I'm kind of.
Okay.
I do all the stuff on the back end to make sure that I'm viable to our team.
Well, what did you think of that? Like when you were like, yo, let's start a show. Where you're like, okay, I'll edit, you do this, or was it like this whole big, plan out of 50-50 or not? You know what I mean? Like how'd you come to that conclusion?
Well, I mean, I jumped in like feet first. It was something that I wouldn't say I'm a control freak, but I definitely want to make sure that if we're gonna do this, because my biggest fear when we first started doing this, and you see this on a lot of podcasts, I think like the average length of a podcast, like before it quits, is like 8 episodes. And so I was always concerned that we would do like 3 or 4 episodes and then all of a sudden be like, yeah, okay, we can't do one this week. Let's do one next week. So I really wanted to make sure that, I can make sure I got this stuff done. And he had kids at that point. I didn't. So I had a lot more free time than he did. So I really just wanted to kind of make sure that, okay, let's do our thing that we want to do. And then I'll take care of the back end. I'll make sure all that stuff gets done. And that way you can deal with the kids. You can focus on your work. And then I can just, spend the extra time to get that part of it done. And actually I learned that like, I really love the editing process. Like it's a lot of fun. It's definitely time consuming. I mean, you could just put it together and put it out there, but I really like to make sure that what I produce is pretty high quality.
Yeah, I think there's something about, I produce a lot of shows myself, but like my own show, I actually enjoy editing more than other shows. Maybe it's because it's me, you want to make it sound good, you enjoy like listening to it, but I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. But I guess the question is more, there's never a point where you're just like, man, I'm doing more work than you, or man, you're lazy this week, or something like that. There's never. I'm trying to get some dirt,
No, I mean there. I wouldn't say there's frustration or anything, but it's definitely like I have a lot of busy work, but there's never anything where, because Richard definitely does not feel ungrateful for that. I mean, when we did our 1-year anniversary episode, like he was. I mean, I didn't ask for it, and he's just like, hey, Shawn's the heart and soul of this. Like I just show up, I talk. And Shawn does all the back end stuff, so he's always seems really grateful for that kind of thing.
That's pretty
and I think
cool.
that makes it worth. Like it's not like, oh hey, and we both love doing the show, so I think that's what also helps, because it's not like, oh shit, well I gotta show up, I gotta talk to Shawn, and then he'll do all the stuff on the back end. Like, oh crap, it's Saturday. All right, well we gotta do our show. It's not. It doesn't feel like that. So I think that's what makes the back end of it worth it. And plus, getting to re-listen to it multiple times definitely kind of gives me that spark of creating this show.
And you guys never missed a Sunday, you said, or?
Yeah, so we released on back in June of 14, I think.
Yeah, 14.
Yeah. So yeah, since June of 14, we've released an episode every single Sunday, and our 170th episode comes out on the 24th of September. We had an episode 00, which came out, which was kind of like a trailer. So that's technically 171 straight weeks we've released an episode.
Jeez, man. So I guess because a lot of people say scheduling is so. Like when you ask about co-hosting, that's the number one thing they say. Scheduling's hard. Someone's always busy. So is it just because like you guys have a love for it, or is it kind of like this like unspoken agreements? Like, dude, like let's really do this. Let's really make sure we hit every episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's definitely that kind of unspoken. It was unspoken, but now it's spoken. We've because when we first started, it was like, okay, we'll try to do it weekly, see what happens. And it was crazy because, like, okay, so we did, I think, 2 or 3 episodes ahead of time because we kind of wanted to have that bank and make sure that everything was set up correctly. And the closest we ever got to missing an episode, I think, was maybe around the 25 to 30 range of episodes. We had no episode recorded, and it was like a Thursday or Friday, and we kind of put one together right before Sunday. And after that point, we just created a bank of episodes that kind of gave us a little bit of a buffer. And it was one of those things, like, you get to 52 straight weeks, like, oh, crap, okay, well, we made it a year. That's awesome. Like, hardly anybody ever does that. Well, can we make 2 years? Well, all of a sudden, it's 2 years in, and we've done that. Like, okay, well, now it's kind of a game. It's like, okay, well, how long can we keep doing this? And I know a lot of people say, it's like, okay, well, all your episodes, like, they can't be great. Like, there's got to be some that are just forced. And, I mean, you're doing 170 straight weeks. There's probably some episodes that aren't the greatest, but we've definitely been like halfway through recording and said, you know what, this isn't working. Like, this isn't funny. I feel like we're forcing it. Let's scrap this and we'll come back tomorrow and try something else. And I mean, we've done that probably 2 or 3 times. I mean, that's at the cost of maybe missing a Sunday, but we definitely want to create good content. We don't want it to be kind of crappy. So if we have to throw it away or maybe cut out a bit, we're totally open to doing that. And we're not keeping ourselves to a time limit either. Typically, they get to be about, 55 to a minute 15 or hour 15. And we try to stay in that ballpark. But, like if we had an episode that was 30 minutes long, which we haven't yet, but if that was what the quality was, that's what we would give to the listeners.
Do you guys don't think too far ahead? Like, if it's, 1 year from now, are we still going to be doing this? Or do you have any future plans or future ideas for the show?
The main goal of it is to keep going. For sure, we just, we kind of this year, we've kind of fell off of it just because Rich picked up a new job, so he's a little bit more busy. But we kind of planned out our next 4 episodes of like, okay, let's talk about this article, this article, this article. We'll do this draft. The other thing we do is every 5 episodes, we'll do a draft episode, which is kind of like an NFL draft. We'll do 7 picks, flip-flop back and forth on a topic like, scary movies or human abilities or just different things. And we were, kind of saying, okay, here's the 4 things we'll talk about for the next 4 weeks. But since we got busy, it's kind of fallen off that. And so it's more of like, okay, well, we're going to record in 5 days. Do you have anything that seems interesting to you that you'd like to talk about? And we kind of just jump off on that, and then that's what we'll talk about.
Yeah, I like the actually I like the NFL draft style one. That's the first episode I listened to, was the romantic comedies one.
Nice.
Yeah, that was a good one. So I think that's maybe, I don't know, it's different for everyone, but that's cool. Okay, so say that. Well, actually, first question before I ask you the other one is: do you guys make any money directly from the show?
We have a Patreon, and it got up to, and like I said, like this show is definitely not paying our bills. Yeah. But at one point it was up to like $40 a month, which was pretty awesome. And then a couple people fell out, so now it's back down to the very lonely $1 a month. But we've also like secured a sponsorship kind of where it's for a earbud company, like a headphone company, where you can use one of our codes and you can get some headphones pretty cheap. So we've done that before, but definitely nothing that's we've definitely put in more money than we've returned on our investment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but I think the ROI really here, and the punchline is really not to be cliche, but the bromance, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like I've left my friends and some when you move out of the States or something like that, man, you lose that friendship. It's so hard to keep a friendship that is not physically able to connect. So I mean, although we have technology that you could Skype, it's still, I think there's still like that little link that's so difficult to kind of meet up. So that's cool that you guys do that.
Yeah, and this gives us that this is kind of what, I mean, we want to meet because we're friends, but this is kind of the thing that forces us to be like, oh, hey, we have to do a show this week. And so that really forces us to get together and do that. And the other thing is, I mean, like you talk about like our download numbers and everything aren't like astronomical at all. Like we probably have a good 40 to 50 people that listen every single week and kind of talk back and forth with us, which, if you would have told us 3 years ago that we'd have 50 people listening to us every week, we'd be like, yeah, right. Like we only have like 10 family members and they're not going to listen. So we know we're not going to have 50 people, but it's in the kind of comedy realm of podcasts, which, typically you don't see a lot of independent comedy podcasts that just explode. Like usually what you see is, the top, 200 in comedy are more like, your Kevin Smiths or, famous comedians, Anna Faris, people that already really have a following. Yeah. I actually just kind of started a podcast not too long ago called Strange Indeed, which is a Stranger Things kind of review podcast. And there are no Strange Indeed or Stranger Things podcasts out there. So, like it's only been out there for like 3 weeks and it's got like crazy numbers. Like it's featured on New and Noteworthy right now. It's in the top 10 of TV and film. And it's just crazy to think like, okay, like Language of Bromance is like my baby. That's the thing I absolutely love doing. Stranger Things is kind of a fun side project. And the Stranger Things thing is just like exploded because it's kind of a genre like TV show that isn't being touched on anything. So people want that content. So I know Stranger Things. I want to see that. Whereas with like Language of Bromance, it's like, well, I don't know who these two guys are. Oh, but I know who Anna Faris is. I'm going to subscribe to that.
So, okay, so say if, hypothetically, I know you don't see it as that. You guys don't necessarily treat it this way. But let's say, you guys started earning, $1,000 a month. You ever, like, have you thought about splitting that up somehow? How do you think it would be? Like 80-20, 50-50?
We haven't really talked about it too much. I mean, to me, the thing I'd want to do if we were earning $1,000 a month, somehow being able to invest that back into the show. I mean, after everything's kind of taken care of, it's like, okay, with this money, is there a way we can try and help reach a bigger audience? Because we tried different like Google ads and Facebook ads and Twitter ads and Reddit ads, and those help bring in a few people. But I think using that money to maybe try and help us kind of stand out would be pretty cool. And equipment, if like Richard's mics need to be replaced or something like that, I think that's what we'd want to use that bucket of money for. Now, the big dream, like if we ever made where we both can make a living off this, I think the thing that we'd really want to do is take that money then and try and do other things. It's crazy with this show, like we do that improv style. So it sparks like all kinds of crazy like ideas that I think would be like, oh, this would be a cool script. This would be a cool story. It's actually kind of like pushed me to like maybe doing audio dramas. You have the equipment, you have the ideas, trying to get like more stories out there. So, I mean, just opening up those avenues would be like ideal if we could ever get to that point. But as far as like what the split would be, we'll probably worry about that when we get to that bridge.
Yeah, right. Keep going until you cross that. But that's cool though. You have your other show, you have this show, man. I think that's cool. And you guys, you seem so passionate about it, which is awesome. So I think that's fulfilling in its own way. You know what I mean? So if I think that's it, man. That's all I really got. I think that's a good nugget for people that like are thinking about co-hosting or not sure, because I think you guys set such a good example for the chemistry you guys share. So I think that's really cool. If someone's looking to check out the show, man, maybe just talk a little bit how to reach out to you. Maybe where someone else could check out the other show, this show.
You can. We're at languageofbromance.com. You can follow us. We're at Language of Bro. We're on Facebook, Language of Bromance. If you want to check out the other show, it's Strange Indeed. It's a Stranger Things podcast. We're at Stranger T-Cast on Twitter. If you look at the Stranger Things podcast is on Podcastica Network. It's also on TV Time app if you want to check that out. And Language of Bromance is part of the Pod Bros Network. Okay.
Wait, do you host the Stranger podcast by yourself, or is that?
No, it's so. It's kind of an interesting story how that one got together, but there's the Podcastica Network. It's by Jason. He does the Walking Dead cast, which is probably like one of the top 5 Walking Dead podcasts out there. And he's formed a group based off his Patreon, and one of the girls and I have co-hosted a few times on a couple of his shows, and we said, hey, we really want to do a show, and like we'll do a Stranger Things show. And he's like, hey, if you want to do that, I'll put it on our network. And so her and I just kind of got together, and we've done the first 3 episodes of the Stranger Things TV show. So we're watching the first season, then we're going to do the second season when it kicks off.
Cool. Okay. All right, cool, man. All right, man. Thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for taking the time. And I had fun. It was good. Actually, I learned a lot about co-hosting, making me think. I'm not sure if it's for me specifically. I'm so impressed with how you guys schedule it and everything. There's so many things that I think a lot of people can learn from. So thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the 14th episode of Podcast Ninja. If you want to check out Shawn or Richard's podcast, or you want to look at his new podcast, Strange Indeed, go ahead and go to podcastninja.net/14. Talk to you soon.
Podcast Ninja.